You're doing well. This video is for 2 Samuel chapter 4 for care groups, and I know there's several people who are unable to come out to care groups because of COVID and other things, and so we just want to give you an opportunity to be able to sort of keep up with the study as we go along. And so this video will be brief, but it's just a summary of chapter 4 and what's going on at this point in the book. Again, as always, I want to encourage you to jump on the website. You can find all of the commentary as well as the care group questions there, and you can always join a care group via Zoom as well if you'd like to jump in that way. Our what we're going to do is just sort of summarize where we've been so far in the book. This Second Samuel is obviously the beginning of the book is David's rise to the throne over a united Israel. Saul had been the king, and there's a progression of time where Saul sort of loses the kingdom. In First Samuel, David and Second Samuel begins with David getting the news of Saul's death, and then he kills the one who comes with the news, thinking that young man had actually killed the king. And then really everything that happens from that beginning point on is really showing David's righteousness as well as his political abilities in terms of uniting the nation. And so we saw in chapter 1 that first Saul is taken out of the way. Chapter 2, we have the story of David being made king in Judah, and then we have the story of Asahel's death with Joab, who now becomes the blood avenger, who will take Abner out of the way. Abner, the Saulite kingmaker, sort of the one who had supported Saul, who was the leader of the army, and then who had propped Ishbosheth up in Mahanaim. And then we needed Abner out of the way, so Asahel is killed in the battle. Joab kills Abner at the gate of the city of Hebron, which is a city of refuge. And then now Abner's dead and out of the way, and really the last person that's still in David's way is Ishbosheth. David would have known Ishbosheth. They grew up probably in the palace together. They would have known each other fairly well. He's a king, and so David would likely not have killed him. It was ancient custom to send them into exile, send them to another place, and so even it had all the elders of Israel had come to David as Abner had sort of negotiated. Even if all that had happened and they had sought to make David king, you still have Ishbosheth. He becomes sort of a problem. As long as there's someone who is from Saul's house who could potentially take the throne, it could happen that there could be an uprising and David could lose the throne. And so what you see in chapter 4 is how God deals with Ishbosheth, the problem of Ishbosheth. And what's fascinating about this is that it comes through sinful means. There's these two guys, Rahab and Baanah, and they're sons of Benjamin. They're really relatively close relatives of Ishbosheth. They're leaders of a command of men. They're leaders of bands, and they're sort of mercenary bands that would go out and plunder local foreign settlements. They take the money back and give it to the king. And so you have these two guys. They're warriors. They show up in Ishbosheth's palace and they kill him. They kill him in a very, very violent way. He's sleeping, taking his midday nap. They stab him in the stomach. They cut off his head, and so they actually just. They're very evil people. They murder an innocent man who's lying on his bed there. And what happens, this entire picture is just showing that everything had destabilized once Abner dies. In fact, in chapter 4, verse 1, it says, Ishbosheth lost courage and all Israel became dismayed. Everyone is disturbed. They know that things are falling apart when Abner dies. And so really what's happening here is the northern tribes are just falling apart. David is increasing in strength, and what really is going to happen is David's going to now come and rule once Ishbosheth is out of the way. Now these two guys, Rahab and Baanah, they kill Ishbosheth, they cut off his head, and they run down to meet David in Hebron, and they come to David and they say, hey, listen, David, we actually killed the guy who was getting in your way. And in chapter 4, verse 8, they say this. They say, behold, the head of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, your enemy, who sought your life. Thus the Lord has given my lord the king vengeance this day on Saul and his descendants. In other words, what they do is they essentially use God and his sovereignty as a means of sort of defending their unrighteous acts. It's really a very amazing statement. In fact, people do this all the time in our lives, right? They say, well, God was in control. That's why I had to do this unrighteous thing. That's not the case. And in fact, David turns that on its head and he says, no, verse 9, he says, as the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life out of all my distress. In other words, God always does redeem me out of all my distress, but he doesn't use you and your sinful means to do that. And he rebukes these men, and he says, there was a man, an Amalekite, who thought that when he brought me the news of Saul's death, it would be good for him, and I would give him a reward, and instead I killed him. Now you come as murderers who have killed a righteous man while he laid on his bed at his midday rest. You're not going to get a reward from me either. And he tells his men to kill them. Why? Because they had sinned against the Lord in killing Ishbosheth in this way. It was an unrighteous thing to do. It was treachery. And so David says, listen, you're going to die for the sin that you've committed in killing this person. They're killed. Their bodies are hung up by the water pool at Hebron. Very violent, very graphic image. Why? Because David is showing you don't sin in this way. What's fascinating about David in this story is you see his humility right before he takes the throne. Of course, it's true. He could have just gone and said, I'm the king. Ishbosheth, get out of here. He could have just done those things. In fact, he could have accepted this head that they delivered to him, which is very gruesome, but he could have accepted it and said, well, in one sense, it's true. God did bring this to me. And he knows that's true, but he's not going to do that. What he's going to do is be righteous. He's going to come at this in a righteous way and trust the Lord to give him the throne in the time that God desires. We see this all the way throughout 1 Samuel, where David refuses to kill Saul, even though he has the opportunity to do so. And now we see it again in 2 Samuel. David's not going to be rapacious. He's not going to grab at his position, his authority as king, even though he has been anointed. He's going to wait for God to do that in his time. Man, it's an excellent lesson for us as believers, as Christians. We need to wait on God. God will provide those things, even things that he promises in his time. We need to trust him and trust his goodness in all those things. I hope this is helpful. Again, I want to encourage you, read the commentary, do the questions. Even if you're not able to come out to care group, take your time and do that. I think you'll be encouraged and blessed. Next chapter, David will become the king, and so we'll see that all take place. Hope you're doing well. Thanks for watching.